And greetings, saints of the Most High. Welcome to another installment of the Messianic Torah Observer. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to fellowship with me here today. I'm coming at you from the DFW here midweek, a little different, but I wanted to share with you this week's Torah reading in our 3-year Torah reading cycle, my thoughts and reflections on this reading. And I just had such a wonderful time over the last couple days delving into this Torah reading, which, by the way, is found in Genesis chapter 19, Bereshit chapter 19, verses 1 through 38. And I wanted to share with you my thoughts and reflections on this reading. And I pray, hope, and trust that not only are you and your fellowships and your families well and blessed this week, but that this installment of TMTO will bless you and that you will get something to help your walk in Messiah, to encourage you in Messiah. I've entitled this discussion this week, Divine Judgment and Mercy, the story of Lot. Divine Judgment and Mercy, the story of Sodom and Lot. My thoughts and reflections on Torah Reading 16. Now, because we're talking about 34 verses, or actually 38 verses to be exact, I'm going to put off reading the passage. I would encourage you, if you are so led, to go ahead and read this chapter this coming Sabbath, if you're led to do so, or even before, or even after. But it is, I hope that what we discuss today will give you food for thought as you study through and read through this Torah reading. So let's get into Yah's word today. We find in Genesis, Bereshit chapter 19, beginning at verse 1. And let me set the table here. Let me set the stage here of what's happening in this passage. It is, of course, we just talked about it, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and how Lot was caught in the middle of this Sodom and Gomorrah story. We all know the story. We were taught this story when we were probably, if most of us who came out of denominationalism or Sunday school and so forth, were taught this story. We've known it for many, many decades, most of us. But I want to shed some different light on it, a light that we weren't privy to before our walk with Messiah here in the Messianic Notzari Nazarene walk. So here in verse 1, the table is set, and we have Lot. And we all know that Lot was Abraham's nephew. And Abraham's nephew, Lot, is sitting at Sodom's gate. What is the significance of Lot being seated at Sodom's gate? Well, it's likely that Abraham's victory over Kedorlaomer and the 3 other powerful Mesopotamian kings who assaulted the city plains or the city states of the plain back in Genesis chapter 14, it resulted in Lot being perhaps promoted or having favored status conferred upon him by the citizens of Sodom. Why would this be so? Well, no doubt his advancement in Sodom's society, I'm talking about Lot, no doubt Lot's advancement in Sodom's society came because of his relationship to Abraham, and maybe to some lesser degree, the wealth he accumulated while being attached to his uncle Abraham, and bringing that wealth along with him to the area gave him a leg up among the elite of Sodom society. And I would refer you back to Genesis chapter 13, where Lot accumulates this wealth, and then he chooses to go and dwell in that land that was close by the city plains. I keep saying the city plains. The city states of the plain. Forgive me for that. This is going to be raw today, brothers and sisters. I don't have this well scripted. I'm just going from my thoughts and reflections, so out from my heart. I'm not really scripted much of it, although I have my notes in front of me. But back in Genesis chapter 13, Lot chooses to go and depart from Avram, his uncle, along with all his wealth, and hang out near the city-states of the plain. Now, some commentators suggest that Lot's advancement in Sodom's society, that it included him being a community elder and or leader. Moshe's notation that Lot was, quote, sitting at the gateway of Sodom, end quote, it clearly reveals Lot's exalted position in Sodom's society. Because those who sat at the gateway of ancient Near Eastern cities did so for purposes of conducting business and tending to the legal affairs of that city that they lived. In this case, Lot was probably sitting at the gate conducting business. He's a wealthy man, he's a businessman, and he's tending possibly to the legal affairs of Sodom as well. We see this ancient custom played out in Genesis, or Bereshit chapter 23, verse 18, and Job chapter 29, verses 7 through 17, where mention of individuals in Scripture are positioned and seated in a place of authority at city gates, in particular Job, over in Job chapter 29, verses 7 through 17. Sodom's smuttiness, Sodom's evil, was known as evidenced by Abraham's intercession with Jehovah on the city's behalf. Referencing back to Genesis chapter 18, that was Torah Reading 15. More so, word of Sodom's evil had come to Jehovah's attention. Genesis chapter 18. Beginning at verse 16. And the scripture's ISR reads, "And the men rose up from there and looked toward Sodom, a.k.a. Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them away." We're going to skip over to verse 20. "And Jehovah said, because the outcry against Sodom," again, Sodom is Hebrew for Sodom, "because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very heavy," verse 21, and here's the kicker, "I am going down now to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I know." Again, that was Genesis, or Bereshit chapter 18, and that was verses 16, 20, and 21. Now, Abraham's upbringing of Lot in Yah's righteous ways did not prevent Lot from succumbing to the lure of this sin city of Sodom. And no doubt his moral compass, I'm talking about Lot, no doubt Lot's moral compass had become severely challenged because of his living in such a disgusting place. Let me ask you, how many of us willingly live compromised lives, despite our being or belonging to Jehovah? We're almost like Lot in some ways, where we place ourselves in compromised positions, whether it's the environment we choose to live in, whether it's the relationships we choose to put ourselves or involve ourselves with, the jobs we hold, the communities we live in. all kinds of ways that we compromise ourselves when we are supposed to be chosen of Jehovah, righteous of Jehovah. Yet we subject ourselves, we compromise ourselves by putting us in spiritual harm's way. And this is what we see happening here with Lot. Lot was raised by Abraham for many years in Yah's righteous ways. So him going in down to Sodom to make his wealth, to bring fame and fortune to his life, and to enhance his lifestyle, whatever you want to call it or however you want to look at it, only served to be a portend, let's say, a bad end. You can't continue to live in Sin City and think that it's going to turn out good in the end. It just isn't. So let's move on. Two holy Malachim, and that's Hebrew for messengers or angels. Two angels, let's say, walk into Sodom proper. And this is on verse 1 of chapter 19 of our reading. And Lot, upon seeing these two Malachim, these two angels or messengers entering the city, no doubt entering through the very gate at which he sat, Lot leaves his post, he humbles himself, and he graciously meets these two Malachim, these two angels. Now, the way Lot greets these Malachim, it strongly suggests to me, that is, that Lot recognized the two beings as holy Malachim, holy angels. And I'm stressing holy Malachims because there's bad messengers, bad angels, fallen angels. So when we talk about these Malachim, these are holy Malachim on a mission. And these two beings, we can go back and trace, were with who we would believe is a manifestation of Jehovah himself when he visited Abraham. Now, we can get into discussions on whether, back in chapter 18, where Abraham gets into the discussion with one of the men who came to visit him, which I believe was Jehovah, who manifested himself in human flesh. I don't believe it was a manifestation of Yeshua. I do not believe that, but we're not getting into that discussion here. But these two of these three beings now in this chapter show up. They said we're heading down to Sodom in chapter 18, and here we are in chapter 19. They're showing up at the city gate. And lo and behold, Lot, who's sitting at the gate, runs up and meets them. And the text in chapter 19, verse 1 reads, He being Lot, rose up to meet them, the two Malachim, and he, Lot, bowed himself with his face toward the ground. So it says clearly to me, in my understanding of this passage, that Lot recognized these two beings, these two men, as Malachim, holy Malachim. Why would you go, at being such a high official in a city-state, get yourself up from your post and go and you bow down before these two beings? Well, Lot invites the two Malachim, the two messengers. He not only invites, but he almost pleads with them to accept his hospitality and stay with him and his family in their home for the night. Verse 2 of chapter 19. And the two Malachim initially decline Lot's invitation. This is a normal practice in Middle East, is that you do this 3 times where you decline an offer, and then on the third time or fourth time, you go ahead and you agree. But in this case, the two Malachim initially decline Lot's invitation, and they tell Lot that they would spend the night in the city's open square. Verse 2 still. In ancient times, it was customary for travelers who had no available lodging accommodations to, quote, sleep in the street wrapped up in their cloaks, end quote. And this is from the Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary on the whole Bible. I would add that for the Malachim to stay in the city's open square would have allowed them to see for themselves that which Jehovah revealed to Abraham back in Genesis chapter 18, verses 20 and 21. Now, in just a few moments, we see that the Malachim's suspicions will be confirmed by the very Sodomites who will seek to assault them while being in Lot's home. When I say suspicions, remember back when I read that passage in chapter 18 where the three beings were heading down to Sodom to see if the outcry was indeed accurate. So here, if they were hanging out in the city square that night, they could actually see for themselves that the outcry is either valid or not valid. So the two Malachim ultimately give in to Lot's pressuring, and they accept Lot's hospitality. In what could be seen as an imitation of the hospitality that Abraham extended to his three heavenly visitors back in Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, Lot, quote, made them a feast and baked unleavened bread. And the baking of the unleavened bread was no doubt because of the haste in the meal that he was preparing for them. And the passage says that they ate, end quote. And this is verse 3 of chapter 19. So Lot has them in his home. He goes to the trouble of making a feast, it describes, for the Malachim, and he also serves. And the passage makes it a point that it, in addition to this feast, baked unleavened bread. Now, I find the mention of Lot serving the two Malachim unleavened bread to be interesting. Biblically, unleavened bread is symbolic of sin. And here we have two holy angels sent by Yah to bring judgment to the sin-filled city. It's amazing. It's a pretty cool contrast here. But before the household, they finish the meal and they are settling down for the night. But before the two Malachim could settle down for the night, the men of Sodom surround Lot's home, and the men surrounding Lot's home attempt to assault Lot's guest. The Sodomites demand Lot hand over to them the Malachim, who they knew were guests in his home for obvious evil purposes. They were planning. Verses 4 and 5. So Lot takes it upon himself to quell this situation. He figures, hey, I'm an official here in Sodom. I can fix this problem. And he probably tells the Malachim, I got this. And he goes out to confront the crowd. And he refuses to comply with the demands of the crowd, verses 6 and 7. Instead of handing over his heavenly guest to the Sodomites, what does Lot do? Lot offers his two daughters, to the threatening evil men surrounding his home. Verse 8. Now, I find this to be a desperate move on Lot's part, since it's likely that Lot knew the men attempting to assault his guest weren't the least bit interested in his daughters. They were homosexuals. And the crowd confirms their disinterest in Lot's offer in verse 9, warning Lot to, hey, look, stand back. Stand back, get out of her way. We're going for the two men, who they probably didn't realize were Malachim, because if they did, they probably wouldn't have done or attempted to do what they were trying to do. But here's a question. Why hadn't the crowd assaulted Lot on previous occasions? Well, it seems as though even the evil citizens of Sodom respected Lot's privileged position in their city, saying to Lot as he sought to quench the inflamed situation, quote, "This one," talking about Lot, "this one came in to sojourn, and should he always judge?" End quote. Verse 9. In other words, you may be a judge over us, you may have privilege over us, you may have authority over us, but we're going to have our way with your consent or without your consent. Well, this situation had gotten so out of control at this point that the gathered men's passions had reached the point that they decide to assault Lot, defiantly declaring to him, quote, "Now we are going to treat you worse than them," them being the Malachim, end quote, as they pressed themselves upon Lot. Verse 9. The Malachim, probably realizing the situation is completely out of control and Lot's well-being is in peril, they rescue Lot from the clutches of the gathered Sodomites, pulling him back into his house, shutting the door behind him. Verse 10. The powerful Malachim, knowing that their pulling of Lot into the confines of his home would not diffuse the deteriorating situation, they strike their attackers with blindness. Verse 11. And no doubt this was all the information that the Malachim needed to pull the trigger on Sodom's imminent destruction. And these Sodomites who were trying to attack Lot and attack the two Malachim, who were now blind and groveling around the ground, they didn't know that they had just sealed their fate. Well, as the Sodomites writhe blindly on the ground around Lot's home, the two Malachim reveal to Lot the plan to destroy Sodom. And they instruct Lot, the two Malachim, to gather his family and prepare to escape the impending wrathful judgment that would strike the city and its inhabitants. Verses 12 and 13. We're still in chapter 19 of Genesis. Well, Lot was unsuccessful, however, in convincing his two sons-in-law that they needed to evacuate the city along with him, his wife, and their wives. That is, Lot's two daughters. The text describes Lot's sons-in-law as thinking that Lot was just joking. Verse 14, the story that Lot was putting forth to them sounded fantastical to them. They just said, "No, that's not going to happen. You're crazy. You're crazy, Lot. We got stuff to do. Go away. Nothing's going to happen to us. We're Sodom, for God's sake." Forgetting that just shortly before, probably a few months earlier, the city had been overrun by Mesopotamian kings. And it took Abraham to go and rescue the survivors of that attack. It's funny how people feel that they are beyond harm after things settle down, isn't it? They feel that we're cool, we got it, we're set. They forget things. We forget. Earlier in the text, when offering his two daughters, I'm talking about Lot. When offering his two daughters to the gathered Sodomites instead of handing over to them the two Malachim, Lot describes his daughters to the attackers as virgins. Verse 8. Yet here, in verse 14, the text shows his two daughters were married to these two gentlemen. What gives? Well, it's conceivable that Lot, in a desperate attempt to have the attackers accept his daughters instead of the Malachim, lied to the crowd to make his daughters more appealing to them. Or, I would I would tend to this option. Or conceivably, the two gentlemen in question were betrothed. They were betrothed to Lot's daughters. They weren't truly fully married. They were betrothed. And in Hebrew culture, people treated a formerly betrothed woman as a married woman. And this seems to be the case here, since the attackers would have likely known all there was to know about Lot and his family. Thus, Lot would likely have not tried to perpetrate such a fraud upon his attackers, knowing they would have had full knowledge of Lot's family dynamics. Well, the very next morning, the Malachim forcibly usher Lot and his immediate family, now consisting only of Lot, his wife, and his two daughters, they forcibly usher him out, or them, I should say, the family out of Sodom proper, verses 15 through 17. And the Malachim instructs Lot to take himself and his family and flee to the mountains. Run to the hills, as that saying is. And I'm pretty sure that's probably where that originated. Run to the hills. Leave the cities of the plain altogether, was the instruction. Verse 19. And the Malachim resort to extracting Lot and his family from their Sodom home. And the text describes Lot's response to the urging of the Malachim for him and his family to leave the city quickly as, quote, he, Lot, loitered. Verse 16. Lot didn't want to go. Lot started dragging his feet. He figured that if he can outwait the Malachim on this, that maybe he could probably get to stay. Not really fully processing that an imminent destruction of the city was at hand. And even after being escorted outside the walls of Sodom, Lot pleads with the angels. Verse 18, Lot says to, and I find this interesting, Lot says to the Malachim, verse 18, "Oh no, Yehovah." Wow. Lot utters Yod-He Vav-He to the Malachim, addressing them as Yehovah, Yahweh, Yahuwah, however you declare his name. Verse 19, he says to the Malachim, "Look, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have increased your loving commitment, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I am unable to escape to the mountains, lest calamity overtake me and I die." Boy, oh boy, this man is a whiner, is he not? You're about to die, dude, if you don't move out and get going. Verse 20, look, and this is still Lot complaining to the Malachim, "Look, please, this city is near enough to flee to. And it is small." And what Lot is speaking about is the city Zoar, one of the 5 cities of the plain. And Lot pleads to the Malachim, "Let me escape there to Zoar. Is it not a small matter? And let my life be saved." So Lot didn't want to go to the hills. Either he was scared or terrified to go to the hills. I can identify with that because I'm not an outdoor person. I get it. And I probably would have been happy to go to the next town. Probably find a nice little place to hold up in, and a nice little hotel, motel, YMCA, whatever, as opposed to hanging out in the wilderness. I get that. Well, the Malachim have compassion on Lot and his situation and grant him, 1, the opportunity to seek refuge in Zoar, verse 21, with 2, the guarantee that Zoar would be spared the destruction that was to befall Sodom, verses 21 and 22. So what we see here from a spiritual perspective is that even in our depravity, Jehovah is merciful and gracious, and he grants Lot's petition to flee and take refuge in Zoar. And as horrible as the destruction of Sodom and of her people may seem to the self-righteous and woke souls among us, scholars have concluded that Yah's wrathful judgment or destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah would have actually been swift and merciful. The citizens of these evil cities would not suffer, but quickly succumb to the fire and brimstone that would overtake them. And thus, once Lot secures himself and his family within the confines of Zoar, just after sunrise, the text states that, quote, Jehovah rained sulfur and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah, upon Sodom and Gomorrah from heaven, end quote, verse 23. And so all the cities of the plain, with the exception of Zoar, are utterly destroyed, verse 25. And in that destruction, no life whatsoever survives Yah's wrathful judgment against these evil cities. The text states that Lot's, quote, wife looked back from behind him, the him being Lot. Lot's wife looked back from behind him, and she became a post. Now, some English translations render post as pillar, in that she, Lot's wife, became a pillar of salt. Verse 26. But does the text not state that the destruction of the city-states of the plain did not suffer destruction until after Lot and his family had found refuge in Zoar? Indeed, it did. And this being the case, the question is, how did Lot's wife end up looking back if they were supposed to be in Zoar before the destruction started? Did she simply turn around and look back at her beloved city Sodom? Because she did love it. I believe she was probably as bad as Lot, and she did not want to leave. She had a pampered life. She was probably, well, I don't know how many women were actually there. Probably a decent number of women were there. She was a socialite, no doubt. She was probably a head of some kind of nonprofit over in Sodom. She was out, going to the theater every other night and, having lunch with cucumber salads and sandwiches and things of that nature and so on and so on. So, with the destruction of Sodom, she was probably heartbroken. She was devastated. So did she turn around and look back at her city, Sodom, while in transit to Zoar, which would conflict with the text? Or did she wander or venture back to Sodom amid the destruction? Well, the Hebrew wording in the text, quote, Lot's wife behind him looked, end quote. That's the order and phraseology of the Hebrew text. Lot's wife behind him looked. And it suggests an intense, long gaze at the ongoing destruction of the city she had grown accustomed to and that she loved. This according to E.A. Spicer in his A.B. Genesis commentary on our passage. Now, there is a likelihood then that Lot's wife either doesn't enter Zoar fully with her family, but that she loiters behind Lot and her daughters in order that she may see for herself what was happening to her beloved city Sodom. And I wouldn't discount the possibility that after she and her family entered Zoar shortly thereafter, that she leaves the confines of the city, Zoar, to circle back and check out what was happening to her beloved city, Sodom. Lot's wife intentionally violated Jehovah's explicit instructions to not look back towards Sodom, verse 17. And I say Jehovah's instructions but it was the Malachim's instructions, and the Malachim are operating by the explicit direction of Jehovah, their boss. So yes, she was violating the Malachim's instructions. And Yah had already showed forth tremendous mercy in sparing Lot and his family from his wrathful judgment against Sodom. So to abuse that mercy and violate Yah's explicit instructions is essentially a slap to Yah's face. And that's what Lot's wife did. So I ask you, how many of us do such things, whereby Jehovah sheds his mercy upon us, yet we are quick to transgress his instructions, his commandments? When we take advantage of Yah's mercy, yet intentionally violate his instructions, what are we calling down upon ourselves apart from an extension of the Almighty's wrathful judgment that he levels against his enemies? Well, Lot's wife, because she transgressed Yah's instructions, she got a taste, a terrible taste of Yah's wrathful judgment. Meanwhile, miles away in Mamre, we go back to chapter 18, verse 1, is where Avram lived. And that's where Avram met and entertained the three heavenly beings, one of whom I believe was a human manifestation of Jehovah. And that's where he got the whole lowdown on what was about to transpire over in Sodom from one of these heavenly beings, who I again believe it was Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But back in Mamre here, Abraham witnesses the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, verses 27 and 28. And one can only imagine, though, as Abraham is standing probably on a hillside looking out and seeing something that he could never imagine. I mean, how do you even describe something like that? He would never have seen anything quite like that in his life. And one can only imagine what was going through Avram's mind at that moment, Abraham's mind. I'm still stuck in his pre-Abraham times. But no doubt, Abraham had a sick feeling in his stomach, recalling the conversation he previously had with Jehovah. And it was likely just a couple days before where he pleaded with the Almighty to spare the inhabitants of the city-states of the plain, if not for the sake of just 10 righteous souls. Verse 32 of chapter 18. I wonder if Abraham, perhaps, thought that his nephew Lot had become so consumed by Sodom's evil that maybe Jehovah no longer saw righteousness in him, and that he perished along with the whole of Sodom. I would say it would not be a stretch to think that Abraham knew of Lot's whereabouts before the destruction of Sodom, which is to say that Abraham was aware of Lot's compromised life in Sodom. I wouldn't doubt that at the forefront of Abraham's mind was the well-being of his nephew Lot and his family, whom he dearly loved. This despite Lot's pig-headedness that is described in chapter 13, verses 5 through 13. I would venture to guess that Abraham feared that Lot and his family all fell victim to the irresistible maelstrom he was witnessing from his homestead in Mamre. He was likely heartbroken at the sight of the carnage he was witnessing. But knowing the legendary faith of Abraham, it would not be a stretch to presume that Abraham found peace in knowing that somehow, some way, Jehovah would honor him by saving his nephew. The same thing, the same spiritual situation, this seeing his heart broken, but knowing that Yah can make a way out of a seeming no way when he is led to offer up his son, Yitzhak, Isaac. And we'll see that in just a short few chapters later. And certainly history bears this reality out in that Abraham's intercession did not fall on deaf ears. For Yah ultimately saved the life of Lot and his 2 daughters. How many of us have pleaded with the Almighty to have mercy upon our loved ones and save them from their respective situations and from their sins? We should never give up interceding on behalf of our loved ones. Yah may just honor our faithful intercessions and petitions and bring about miraculous salvation and restoration of our loved ones. Yah is always in charge. And he is always the smartest person in the room. Well, continuing on, eventually, Lot and his 2 daughters leave Zoar. For what reason the text is silent, but only that, quote, Elohim remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him. For he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Verses 29 and 30. Why was Lot afraid to remain in Zoar? Why was he afraid to head out to the wilderness when the Malachim told him the day before, or how many days it was, head for the hills? I can't do that. I'm going to die if I go out into the hills, out into the wilderness. But now he was in Zoar, and he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his 2 daughters went and dwelt in a cave. Yee. Again, I can identify with that. I don't think I would want to do that either. So again, why was he afraid to remain in Zoar? Did he not desperately petition the 2 Malachim to allow him and his family to take refuge in Zoar? Indeed he did. Could it have been that the Zoarians, my wording, that the Zoarians held him responsible for what happened to their sister cities in the plain? Did the Zoarians threaten Lot and his daughters out of fear that the same destruction that destroyed the other 4 cities of the plain would eventually befall them if Lot and his daughters were permitted to remain within their city of Zoar? Some commentators suggest Lot was afraid that a similar fate would befall Zoar as befell Sodom and Gomorrah. But in the end, it's impossible to tell from the text why Lot was so afraid. Needless to say, however, we see at this juncture of the story a massive decline in the quality of Lot's once privileged life. You can't go much further than that. To have a wonderful, blessed, and opulent home and position in society, all the way down to living out his remaining days in a cave with his 2 daughters. At least it would seem so, since we read nothing more. When I say remaining days, it seems so because there's nothing more we read about Lot other than descriptions of Lot in later passages, but nothing about him making an appearance in history. We don't read any more about Lot in history from Scripture, within Scripture. Modern archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that the mountains surrounding the Qumran community and the Dead Sea region, which is the general area where Lot would have been, hiding out in the mountains, well, the mountains and the caves offered the local ancients refuge in the time of turmoil. This information gotten from ESV Study Bible Commentary. While living life at its lowest in a cave along with his daughters, Lot consents to his daughter's urging that he engages in drinking some wine, no doubt using the excuse that drinking the intoxicant might help him cope with the difficult times they found themselves in, verses 31 through 36. The daughters intentionally use Lot's altered, drunken state to become pregnant with their father's children. They were engaging in incest. Their excuse for getting their father drunk and being impregnated with their father's babies was to, quote, preserve the seed of our father, end quote, verse 32. Well, the oldest daughter bore unto Lot a son by the name of Moab. Moab, I know you've heard that. You've heard of the Moabites. Of course, this Moab that was born to Lot would become the father of the Moabites, who would run into conflict with Israel during their wilderness sojourn, as mentioned in Numbers chapter 22 and chapter 26, and at various times when Israel dwelt in the land, as noted in 1 Samuel 12, 1 Samuel 22, 2 Samuel chapter 8, 2 Kings chapter 1, and 2 Kings chapter 3, and so on and so on. However, Yah's plan of salvation, restoration, and redemption would factor heavily into Lot's situation, or at least his heritage situation. For Ruth, a Moabitess, would centuries later become the great-grandmother of King David, and King David would become the sacred line by which our master Yehoshua would emerge. The youngest daughter bears unto Lot a son by the name of Ammon. Heard of the Ammonites? Well, this Ammon would become the father of the Ammonites, who would, like the Moabites, run into conflict with our ancient cousins Yisrael throughout her history, even up to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the return from Babylonian captivity. Ezra chapter 9, verse 1, and Nehemiah chapter 2, 4, and 13. Furthermore, the Ammonites instituted the worship of Molech, and Molech was the god of the Ammonites, the worship of which featured child sacrifices. Well, Jewish tradition refers to the actions of Lot and his daughters as a, quote, great sin upon the earth, warranting Lot's seed to be eliminated from the earth on the day of condemnation, end quote. And this is a passage from Jubilees chapter 16, verses 7 through 9. That is, if Jubilees is to be believed. Despite the suggested despicable nature of Lot's daughters' actions to perpetuate their father's lineage, resulting in the emergence of two nations that would centuries later become a thorn in our ancient cousin's side, the Moabites and the Ammonites, well, Yah's sovereignty and omniscience, his all-knowing, overshadowed the enemy's plans to thwart the Almighty's will for his set-apart people and the whole of humanity. As just mentioned, Ruth, great-grandmother of King David and matriarch of Yehoshua's biological line, was a Moabite. So what is that adage which holds true here? Even in our reading today, that Jehovah will always make lemonade out of lemons. In our remaining time, I want to go through my thoughts and reflections on this reading. I've already given you a lot of them already, but I have some further thoughts on it. And as I studied through our reading this week, I couldn't help but recall that passage in 2 Peter where the apostle refers to Lot as righteous. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7. And given all that we've come to learn about Lot's life choices, and they weren't good life choices, I couldn't wrap my head around the concept of Lot being referred to as righteous by the apostle. Lot knew of, and for a period of time, no doubt, walked in the ways of righteousness. He was tied to the hip of his uncle, Abraham. But he ultimately got caught up in the allure of Sodom and of the wealth and of authority and notoriety. We find in 1 John chapter 2, the scriptures ISR reads verse 15, "Do not love the world, nor that which is of or in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." Verse 16, still 1 John chapter 2. "Because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, all of which Lot got caught up in, mind you, is not of the Father, but is of the world." Righteousness often struggles to overcome the lust of the flesh and the eyes and the pride of life. That is, believing that we have arrived. That is, being presumptuous. And that is, being full of ourselves. And unfortunately, Lot seemed to have succumbed to all of these areas of temptation. Not that Lot engaged, let's say, in any unseemly activity in Sodom. I don't believe he did. But the fact remains that he, Lot, was compromised in various areas of his life because he embedded himself in an environment where righteousness could not and did not exist. It was an unidentified voice from heaven that admonishes Yah's people. "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, unless you receive of her plagues." Revelation chapter 18, verse 4. Despite all the negative stuff that befell Lot in our reading, we see righteousness prevail. Jehovah facilitated Lot and his family's rescue as a testimony to Lot's righteousness. Abraham had previously interceded and pleaded for his nephew's salvation, undoubtedly including Lot in his petition that Sodom be spared if just 10 righteous people were found there. Genesis chapter 18, verse 13. Clearly, Jehovah deemed Lot righteous enough to save him from his wrathful judgment against Sodom. Yah searches the hearts of humanity. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9, Romans chapter 8, verse 27, and Revelation chapter 2, verse 23. And Yah works with and saves those whom he chooses. And clearly, Jehovah loved Lot. Jehovah chose Lot. Why? Well, maybe because of his steadfast love for his friend Abraham, Lot's uncle. Or maybe Yah saw something in Lot that resonated with him. Only Yah knows. What we have before us in this amazing story, beloved, is a foreshadowing of Yah's grand plan of salvation, redemption, and restoration. Abraham is a type of Yeshua Messiah, while Lot foreshadows us who desperately need deliverance, redemption, and restoration. The patriarch, Abraham, intercedes for others, particularly his nephew Lot, all of whom faced destruction were it not for the intercessor's pleas. Lot and his family are saved through Abraham's righteousness. Hallelujah. Lot then is a reflection, a portrait of ourselves. For despite our many deficiencies, beloved, Jehovah has chosen us from the billions of souls that inhabit this planet to have a relationship with and to save us and to deem us righteous through his glorious Son and right hand, Yehoshua Messiah. And because of his Son's righteousness, we are being saved from Yah's coming wrathful judgment against this world. So what then do we do with this amazing reality? Other than worship, trust, obey, thank him, love him, even more for extending his perfect Son's righteousness to us. I hope you got something out of this discussion today. I enjoyed discussing it with you, and I hope you do your own study of this amazing story. Delve into it deeply, because there are many, many spiritual gems that are nestled in this story. Now, if perhaps you've come across this website, this platform, our YouTube channel, or any one of our podcast platforms, and you are intrigued by this lifestyle, this messianic walk, I would invite you to, or let's just say I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, or let's just say that you need to come and get saved. You need to enter into a relationship with the creator of the universe. You need to escape the coming wrath that is coming to this planet. You need to come out of Sodom. You need to come out of Babylon today, as in Revelation 18:4. Because the day is the day of salvation, as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, and that's a reiteration of Isaiah chapter 49, verse 8. If you want to receive the righteousness of Yeshua, our Messiah, I invite you to turn to Jehovah and confess your sins to him. Turn from the life you once lived. Receive Yeshua as your master and walk steadfastly in his ways. Walk according to his teachings and his example. Enter a covenant relationship with Jehovah, your creator, by obeying him and walking in his ways. Be water immersed and receive Jehovah's indwelling presence, which will lead you to desiring to walk in Torah. Open yourself to the leading of Yah's indwelling presence in your life. Take up your execution stake and follow Yeshua, never looking back, but looking ever so forward. Seek after Yah's kingdom and his righteousness, Matthew 6:33, and walk steadfastly in your calling and purpose. And if you will walk in this way of life, and you commit yourself to walking in this way of life, please contact me, and I will point you in the right direction. That's all we have for today. And until next time, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. Shavua Tov. Shabbat Shalom. Until next time, take care.